I never thought that Sunday dinner would end up being the day I reclaimed my life. "You'll never be like my wife's mom," Greg said, smirking like a little boy who thought he'd just won a game he didn't even know he was losing. Rachel didn't flinch. She just stabbed at her roasted carrots and took another bite, as if I weren't even sitting there. I didn't respond, I smiled. Not from warmth, but because I finally saw them clearly. Two people who believed my worth could be measured against a woman with designer handbags and a cold, curated life. I folded my napkin, placed it neatly beside my plate, and excused myself. They didn't notice. That night, back in my study, I opened the ledger I kept in my mind, and finally began to subtract. I logged into the accounts. 11 years of monthly transfers. $3, $200, like clockwork. I'd labeled them kindly over time. Tuition, rent, family assistance. I canceled every one of them. Every single one. I don't know what I expected to feel. Guilt? Sadness? Regret? What I felt was peace. That quiet, potent kind of peace that fills your lungs like oxygen after holding your breath for too long. I exhaled. By morning, my phone was silent. No text from Greg. No thank you. No, are you okay? Not even the usual Monday morning ping from Rachel with a reminder about their utilities or Lily's piano lessons. Nothing. I drank my coffee hot, the way I like it, with the windows open and the breeze cutting through the kitchen. I had been their quiet benefactor, the invisible hand that kept the lights on and the fridge full. They didn't even know the cord they'd been swinging from was mine. But now they were going to feel the drop. Midnight had come. And the transfers stopped. The night before, I canceled every monthly transfer to Greg and Rachel. By morning, their silence told me everything. It started in 2013, the year Harold died. Greg was barely 29, newly married, and anxious about money. Rachel had just finished grad school, and they were drowning in student loans. I remember standing in the funeral reception line, still clutching the program from Harold's service, when Greg pulled me aside with wide, tearful eyes. "Mom, we don't know how we're going to afford the mortgage this month." That's all it took. One sentence. One look that reminded me so much of Harold when he was young and proud, but tired. I wired the money that night. And like everything else I did for my son, I did it with love. Helping them get through the storm became a habit. Then it became expected. It was always temporary, until it wasn't. A few months later, I helped pay off Rachel's loans. Then, the down payment for the Round Rock house. Just a bridge loan, they called it. That bridge stretched 11 years long. And through it all, there was Marjorie, Rachel's mother. The ghost I could never quite escape. Everything about her was clean and shiny. White linen pantsuits, smooth blowouts, teeth too white to be real. Marjorie didn't raise Rachel so much as fund her. I was the opposite. I did the dirty work. Babysitting, casseroles, checkbook balancing, reading to the kids when they were sick. But still, she was the one they admired, not me. They drank Marjorie like champagne. I was just the water glass on the side, useful but forgettable. It wasn't any one moment that broke me. It was the quiet erosion over time, being the one they called when their car wouldn't start, but never invited when Lily won her school award. Hearing, "Thanks, Dot," instead of, "Thank you, Mom," always Dot. Never Mom. That night at dinner, when Greg compared me unfavorably to Marjorie, he wasn't insulting me. Not intentionally. That was the worst part. He truly didn't think it was cruel. Because somewhere along the line, they stopped seeing me as a person. Just an ATM, with a kind voice and a strong password. They'd stopped seeing me as a person. Just an ATM, with a kind voice and a strong password. It didn't happen all at once. That's how it gets you. The shift is slow. So slow, you start convincing yourself you're imagining it. The comments feel like static in a radio, barely noticeable unless you're really listening. And for a long time, I wasn't. At first, it was little things. Marjorie says salmon should never be grilled. Rachel mentioned at the Labor Day cookout, wrinkling her nose at my cedar plank fillets like they were microwaved fish sticks. Or, Mom, maybe just stick to the iPad. We'll set up the finances. Greg said one Christmas when I offered to help them review their year-end budget. The iPad I'd bought him, by the way. And always with that tone. That gently patronizing tone reserved for the old and the inconvenient. I played it off. Laughed when I didn't want to. Bit my tongue until it bled. Because you want to be the peacemaker. You want to be the cool mom, the helpful mother-in-law, the one who doesn't ruffle feathers. You think if you're kind and flexible enough, you'll earn your seat at the table? Not just a seat, but a place. But some tables were never meant to include you. Not really. The final straw wasn't loud. It didn't happen during a screaming match or in some dramatic Thanksgiving blow-up. No, it happened in the softest, most infuriating way possible. Last November, I brought something special to Thanksgiving dinner. Harold's mother's diamond pendant. I'd kept it wrapped in velvet in a safety box for years. Rachel had a charity gala coming up, and I thought, just maybe, offering that pendant would be a gesture. A bridge. When I handed it to her, she smiled, one of those tight, closed-lip smiles. Then, without hesitation, she handed it to Lily, her toddler, and said, "Look, costume jewelry." The baby giggled and dropped it on the tile. Greg laughed. I didn't. I bent down, quietly picked up the heirloom, and held it in my palm like the heart they'd just stomped on. I smiled so I wouldn't cry, smiled so hard my cheek muscles hurt. I left early that night, told them I wasn't feeling well. And in a way, that was true. I was sick to my stomach with how small they made me feel. But the moment I pulled into my driveway and locked my front door, I whispered to myself, this ends soon. I didn't know how, but I knew when. Soon. They'd humiliated me over a family heirloom, but I knew something they didn't. I wasn't powerless. I never had been. I didn't scream. I didn't throw things. I didn't storm out and demand apologies that would only come with conditions. No, I went home, poured a glass of Merlot, and opened my old CPA binder. They'd forgotten who I was. Maybe they never really knew. 35 years as a tax consultant and estate planner. Clients with portfolios bigger than Rachel's mother's ego. I'd walked ranchers through generational wealth transfers and taught divorced women how to build financial independence from scratch. When Harold and I moved to Austin in the 80s, I helped found a women's investment co-op that still meets every quarter. I know what a durable power of attorney looks like and what a forged one feels like. I'm not helpless. I'm not senile. And I'm not scared of confrontation. I just don't waste it on people who aren't worth the show. My home office doesn't look like much. Just a roll-top desk, a corkboard with yellowing notes, an old printer that grumbles every time it wakes up. But it holds decades of records. Every deposit, every withdrawal, every document I'd ever signed, notarized, filed, or questioned. Rachel and Greg thought they could treat me like a half-senile charity case because I made it easy. I didn't push. I didn't probe. I let the comments slide. I handed over money with a smile. But the truth is, I knew where every dollar went. I never trusted blindly. I documented everything. When I canceled the transfers, I didn't just click stop. I created backups. I exported spreadsheets. I logged timestamps and source IP addresses. I changed all passwords, doubled the character count, added MFA, locked them out of the financial universe I'd built, and then I picked up the phone. There was one name I hadn't said aloud in years, but it came to me easy. Esther Nguyen. She was barely 26 when I mentored her during her CPA licensing. Nervous, brilliant, curious. I hadn't spoken to her in over a decade. But LinkedIn said she now ran her own firm, estate strategy, forensic audits, high net worth protections. Exactly the skill set I needed. I left a message on her office line. Hi, Esther. It's Dot Parker. I think it's time we talk. I've got a situation. I called Esther Nguyen, a former mentee turned forensic accountant. I said I had a situation. She replied, "Let's burn the whole playbook." Esther met me at my favorite cafe in Austin. Quiet place, good light, bad scones. She arrived precisely on time, wearing a sleek navy suit and tortoiseshell glasses. That made her look every bit the powerhouse I'd always known she'd become. "Dot," she said, embracing me like family. "You mentored me when no one else would. Whatever this is, I've got you." I slid the manila folder across the table. Printouts, screenshots, transaction logs. Every deposit I'd made to Greg and Rachel's accounts for the last 11 years. Her eyes scanned quickly, highlighting, circling. When she got to the spreadsheet labeled Gifts and Transfers, Parker Household, she raised one eyebrow. $3, $200 a month. That's not a gift, that's a payroll. I chuckled, but there was no humor in it. She flipped through the documents and leaned in. "And they've never declared these transfers? You realize, if they filed joint taxes and left this off, that's a tax evasion risk. Not yours, theirs." "I know. So what's your goal here?" she asked, already pulling out her tablet. "Just to shut off the money? Or are we looking for something bigger?" I didn't hesitate. "I want a forensic audit of anything they've touched that traces back to me. The house, the loans, any shared accounts. I want the trust evaluated, and if needed, restructured." Esther paused. "And emotionally?" I looked her straight in the eye. "I want peace. I want boundaries back. And I want them to know they lost me. Not the money. Me." She nodded. "Let's call it a legacy audit," she said, smiling as she typed a note into her tablet. "And let's keep it under the radar until we know what we're looking at. You keep playing the generous mother. I'll start digging." We parted an hour later. She handed me a checklist of documents to gather: birth certificates, trust agreements, old POAs, property deeds. I had almost all of it. As I stepped into my car, I realized I felt something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Backed. Not just protected. Not just heard. Backed. Let Greg smirk. Let Rachel rattle her bracelets and quote Marjorie's latest pearls of wisdom. They had no idea who they were playing, and they damn sure didn't see Esther coming. With Esther in my corner, I had a rare moment of clarity. It wasn't about punishing them. It was about reclaiming myself. I sat in my sunroom that night, the one Harold built when we turned 50. He called it the thinking room. That's where I went, coffee in hand, to make my list. What did I actually want? Cutting off the money felt good, but it wasn't enough. Not after what they'd done, what they'd taken for granted, how they'd laughed as they broke things that mattered. I didn't want revenge, I wanted accountability. So I started writing. 1. Reallocate the trust. Greg was the primary heir Harold and I agreed on back when things were different. Back when Greg still called just to say, "Hi, Mom." Back when he picked me up from my colonoscopy without needing a reminder. I wanted Esther to assess whether a trust restructure was possible. Not out of pettiness, out of duty. If Greg and Rachel had abused their position, they should be disqualified. I wanted their children protected, yes, but I didn't want a single dollar going through Rachel's hands. 2. Formal audit of joint assets. There were lines I'd never crossed. I'd let them link me to the house refi. I'd trusted their explanations for co-signatures, emergency withdrawals. But no more. I wanted to know exactly what I'd been tied to and what legal right I had to untie it. 3. Restoration of boundaries. Financial, legal, emotional. No more guilt texts, no more obligation visits, no more playing nice just to be tolerated. If they wanted me in their lives, it would be on mutual terms, not as their lifeline, not as their fallback plan, and sure as hell not as their walking checkbook. Esther and I reviewed the list the next morning over Zoom. She nodded after each point. "This isn't about revenge," she said. "It's about clarity. You're protecting your future and making sure no one else writes your legacy for you." Exactly. For 11 years, I'd played the role they assigned me. Helpful, quiet, generous. I was done being the background character in my own story. It was time to become the main event. With my priorities clear and Esther fully briefed, we started digging. It didn't take long to find the first rot in the foundation. It was a file buried inside a Google Drive folder called Parker Budgeting 2022. Harmless at first glance. Greg had once asked me to help set it up when he was applying for a business grant. I'd shared a template with him. Expense tracking, income forecasting, the usual. Apparently, they never removed my access. Esther flagged the folder during her digital asset review. "Do you recognize this name?" she asked during our next call. I nearly laughed. "It's my file." Or at least, it started that way. There were tabs for mortgage payments, school fees, utilities, travel. And then, a sheet labeled Projected Support, 2023. The category under Greg's name read, Expected Annual Gifts from Mom, $38,000, confirmed. Next to it, a comment bubble in Rachel's voice, same as last year. Don't tell her about the refinancing yet. I stared at the screen, bile rising. Confirmed, like it was a standing order, like I was a scheduled deposit. And that note, don't tell her about the refinancing. My chest tightened. It explained so much. The way Greg had brushed off my questions about the house remodel. The sudden landscaping upgrades, the new Tesla. I'd asked once, lightly. New car? I didn't think Rachel liked electric. Greg had laughed it off. Oh, you know Rachel. Always chasing trends. It was a deal. Now I knew what the deal was. They'd factored me in like a line of credit. Like I wasn't even a person, just a fixed income stream. And they were hiding things, strategically. I printed the file and added it to the growing binder in my study. Esther was calm as always. This is our breadcrumb, she said. It proves premeditated financial dependency. It's not illegal, yet. But if there's more, there is, I said quietly. There has to be. Because people like Greg and Rachel don't just cross boundaries. They erase them, piece by piece, smile by smile. They test how much they can take before you say no. Well, they'd found their line. And now I was the one drawing it, straight, firm, and backed by evidence. In their shared budget, I found proof they'd planned my gifts like a salary. But that was just the first layer. The second one made my hands shake. I don't know what made me double-check the refinance. Maybe it was Rachel's smug little comment, don't tell her about the refinancing yet. Or maybe it was instinct. 35 years in finance had taught me to trust the itch when something didn't smell right. Esther showed me how to pull county property records. Public data, simple lookup. Their house in Round Rock had been refinanced in June 2022. That part one expected. What I didn't expect was seeing my name on the lender's asset declaration. I blinked. Esther. I turned my laptop around. They listed me. And look, here. I pointed to a scanned form. Asset verification. Life insurance. They'd listed my policy, my life insurance, as collateral. Esther leaned in, her expression hardening. And this signature? She asked. It was mine. Sort of. Except it wasn't from that refinance. It was from an old power of attorney form I'd signed back in 2018, when Greg had needed me to temporarily handle some of Lily's school paperwork while he and Rachel were overseas. They'd scanned it, copied my signature, repurposed it, and used it to secure a private loan from Rachel's cousin's venture group, who, conveniently, was not a licensed lender, just a, quote, private equity consultant, without my knowledge, without my consent. They'd bet on my death to secure a better interest rate. And they'd done it quietly, in the background, assuming I'd never notice. That I was too kind, too soft, too old to question. Esther was already typing. This changes everything. We're moving into fraud territory. Depending on how that form was used and presented, it could be forged documentation. At the very least, it's deceptive financial conduct involving a vulnerable party. Vulnerable. The word hit me like a slap. I had never felt vulnerable in my entire professional life. But that's what they were counting on. Greg, my son, Rachel, the woman who smiled at me with lip gloss and ice in her eyes. They thought they were clever. They thought I wouldn't check. But they forgot who taught Greg to balance a budget, who stayed up late reviewing college scholarship forms, who always knew where every receipt went, every penny landed. They forgot the worst possible thing you can forget. I pay attention. I discovered they'd used my life insurance as collateral, with a signature copied from an old POA form. I was still processing the betrayal when the manipulation kicked in. The voicemail came first. "Hey, Dot, just checking in." Rachel's voice oozed fake warmth, each syllable syrupy and brittle. "Greg noticed some banking hiccups. Not sure if maybe you changed cards or something? Totally fine, of course. We just have a few bills pending. So, just let us know if there's a mix-up." I didn't respond. 5 hours later, Greg texted, "Mom, I told you not to mess with things unless we talked first. This is bigger than just you." I stared at that sentence for a long time. Just you. Like my own money, my name, my damn life insurance policy were just side characters in the drama of their lives. I didn't text back. I didn't need to, because I knew what this was. Not panic, not remorse. Control. They weren't sorry they'd done it. They were rattled they'd been caught. And now, like clockwork, came the guilt strategy. Reframe my boundaries as instability. My silence as overreaction. The old script. Dot, we're all family. Mom, don't make this harder than it has to be. You've always helped us. Always helped us. Like it was my role, my duty. I remember once, back in 2015, when Rachel's car broke down the day before Greg's job interview. I drove across town, paid for the tow, sat with Lily while they sorted it out. Rachel cried with gratitude then. But that was a long time ago. Gratitude had curdled into expectation. Now, when I didn't respond right away, Rachel sent another message, this time through a third party. "Hey Dot, it's Tanya from yoga. Rachel mentioned you might be having some tech trouble. I can help if you need." It sounded urgent. I almost laughed. They were crowdsourcing concern now, painting me as forgetful, confused, laying the groundwork for a narrative I'd seen too many times. The aging mother who can't be trusted to manage her affairs. They were worried. Good. Let them worry. Because while they were busy checking my tone and planting seeds in the community, Esther was busy pulling records, gathering timestamps, and drafting something with teeth. They'd underestimated me for the last time. Rachel and Greg had started their smear campaign, casting me as confused and unstable. Meanwhile, Esther and I built something stronger, a paper trail they couldn't outrun. Esther called it Receipt Day. She came over with her tablet and a portable scanner, and we set up shop right at my dining room table. Me in Harold's old chair, her with a black coffee and a calm fire in her eyes. "I've got two more," she said, tapping her screen. The first was an email chain between Rachel and her cousin, the same one behind that shady, private loan. Subject: Trust adjustments and access. Rachel had written, "If Dot doesn't formally update the trust by Q3, we may need to push her on adding me as co-executor. She's generous when she's not overwhelmed. I think we can get her to see the value." Her cousin replied, "Start small. Guilt works better than force. You've got time before she realizes how much is in her name." I gripped the edge of the table. Esther placed her hand over mine. "That's not strategy," she said. "That's manipulation. Documented." The second receipt was worse. A wire transfer form. One of my templates, the kind I'd made back when I volunteered with the women's co-op. It had my name at the top, but the signature? Pasted in. Dated the same week I was abroad in Spain with my bridge club. "Dot," Esther said gently, "you were out of the country. You couldn't have signed this." I nodded. I already knew. Somehow, seeing it in print made it real in a way my gut never could. They hadn't just counted on my kindness. They'd stolen my voice, my identity, my financial presence, piece by piece. To the world, I was still the doting, aging mom who helped out when asked. To them, I'd become an invisible asset, a faucet, a loophole. I stood up, walked to the living room, and stared at the family photo Rachel had printed last Christmas. Matching pajamas. Forced smiles. I pulled it off the wall. Back at the table, I looked Esther in the eye. "This isn't just fraud," I said. "This is theft." She nodded. "And now it's provable." We weren't done yet, but the stack of evidence was growing. What they didn't know was that every paper they'd carelessly forged, every email they thought I'd never see, every small cruelty they treated like a joke, was now Exhibit A. And I was done being quiet. Esther and I had gathered proof of manipulation, forgery, and financial deceit. I thought I'd seen the worst of it. I was wrong. It came in an email from Esther with the subject line, "Urgent, confirm if this is yours." Attached was a PDF titled, "Durable Financial Power of Attorney, Dorothy Parker." It was notarized. Stamped. Filed 6 months ago. Esther's message read simply, "Did you authorize this?" I opened the file and scrolled. The signature looked like mine, close enough to fool someone who didn't know better. But I hadn't signed it. Not then. Not ever. This document transferred durable financial power of attorney to Rachel. Effective immediately. It claimed I'd, quote, "requested the transition due to signs of early-stage cognitive decline and difficulty managing complex accounts." The wording was familiar. A little too familiar. Because it was lifted, almost verbatim, from an article I'd once written for the co-op on elder care planning. They'd used my own words to justify handing over my autonomy. Esther called 5 minutes later. The notary who signed that. Marla Greaves? She lost her license in 2017 for falsifying records. She's not legally allowed to witness anything. I didn't speak. I couldn't. I just sat there in my kitchen, Harold's teacup cooling in my hands, while the truth broke open inside me like a bone snap. This wasn't about a misunderstanding. This wasn't even just greed. This was a calculated, legal ambush. Rachel hadn't just positioned herself as the financial manager in waiting. She had taken the role. Without my knowledge. Without my consent. With a forged document and a dead notary's rubber stamp. Esther's voice softened. This is serious. It's criminal impersonation, document fraud, abuse of power, especially if they've used it for anything. Even inquiries, I whispered. They're trying to get ahead of my mind. What do you mean? They're laying the groundwork. First the budget, then the third party, concerned friend, messages, now this. They want people to believe I'm slipping. Then we stop them now, she said. I nodded slowly, staring out the window at my rose bushes, the ones Greg once helped Harold plant after his heart surgery. For a moment, I wanted to scream. But I didn't. I just whispered, "It won't work." Because they were expecting the version of me who smiled through insults and stayed quiet through betrayal. They weren't ready for this version. The one with records. The one with allies. The one who wasn't afraid of courtrooms or consequences. They'd forged a POA, weaponized my own writing, and quietly tried to erase my autonomy. I didn't feel afraid. I felt gutted. That night, I sat in Harold's armchair, the one with the sunken side where he always leaned left during his crossword puzzles. I hadn't moved it since he died. I pulled a blanket over my lap, the same one Lily used to curl up in during sleepovers before Rachel decided I was too old-fashioned to babysit anymore. The silence of the house crept in around me like fog. No ticking clock, no soft footsteps upstairs, no low murmur of Harold's late-night radio. Just me, and the sharp, intimate sting of betrayal. I didn't cry at first, not when I found the spreadsheet, not when I saw my own forged signature, not even when I realized Rachel had slowly built a legal paper trail to paint me as mentally incompetent. But sitting there, with my hand resting on the worn armrest where Harold used to squeeze my fingers during bad news, I finally broke. I cried the way you cry when you're alone. No drama, no gasps, just quiet, steady collapse. Because it wasn't just the fraud. It was the realization that my son, my Greg, had let this happen. Maybe even helped it happen. I thought about the Christmas when he scraped together money for me to get my brakes fixed. The way he used to call me Mama Dot when he was little and worried. Where had that boy gone? Had I pushed too hard? Given too much? Or had I made it so easy to take advantage of me that they didn't even notice when they crossed the line? Or worse, they did. And they crossed it anyway. I looked around the room, at the photos they used to praise, the quilt they pretended to love, the birthday cards tucked into the bookshelf, empty sentiment in flowery cursive. None of it meant anything now, because the truth had settled in, finally and fully. They don't love me. They love access to me, access to my money, my legacy, my silence, and the price of reclaiming myself. Everything else. Esther texted to check in. Still with you. We've got this. One step at a time. I stared at her message, then looked back at the dusty corner of the bookshelf where Harold's war medals sat untouched. No one fights for you the way you fight for yourself. I dried my face, stood up, and whispered out loud, "Let's end this." I'd cried in Harold's chair. Then I stood up. Because pain is clarifying. And now I was ready to fight back. Legally, strategically, quietly. Esther's voice over speakerphone was crisp, focused. We do this surgically. No screaming matches, no warnings. We let the law speak for you. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Are you up for seeing them face to face? She asked. Yes, because avoiding them would have felt like weakness. And I wasn't weak. Not anymore. We scheduled a meeting at Turner & Stein, a downtown Austin law firm with a reputation for handling estate disputes discreetly and definitively. Esther called it a trust revision consultation. We made sure that's exactly how Greg and Rachel would see it. Dot just wants transparency. Esther had told Greg when she called, cheerful and casual. She's reviewing some of her old estate documents and would like everyone present, just to be sure it's aligned. He took the bait. Of course, he'd said, happy to help. Help, as if that's what he'd been doing all along. Rachel confirmed immediately after. I'll bring the originals, she wrote in her email. Always good to keep things above board. I forwarded the message to Esther without a word. This wasn't going to be a confrontation. It was going to be a performance. Because the thing about predators like Greg and Rachel, they thrive in confusion, in chaos, in making you feel overwhelmed and overreactive. But that boardroom would be quiet. The chairs would be leather, the lights soft, the paperwork numbered and tabbed. There would be no yelling. Only facts. Only evidence. Esther booked the largest conference room. Glass walls, soundproofing, private exit. We printed duplicates of every forged document, every email, every shady transaction, each labeled in a navy blue binder with my initials in gold foil. They'd show up, expecting to finesse an old woman. Instead, they'd walk into a courtroom without a judge. And we'd already prepared the verdict. That weekend, I cleaned out my study. Not for them, for me. I pulled the photos off the wall, boxed the ones that still brought warmth, and burned the ones that didn't. I took Harold's quilt to be professionally cleaned. I picked out a new armchair, not to replace his, but to sit beside it. Because I wasn't erasing the past. I was reclaiming space in it. I dressed calmly the morning of the meeting, a charcoal pantsuit, the one I wore to my last client pitch before retirement. Simple gold earrings, clean face, steady hands. Time to end the show. I whispered to my reflection, and this time, I'm writing the final scene. We lured them into a legal office under the pretense of a, quote, trust review. But what waited for them wasn't a consultation. It was an unveiling. October 3rd, R.D. Turner and Stein's conference room smelled like fresh leather and cold strategy. Esther sat at the head of the long mahogany table, professional but unreadable, her navy blazer buttoned high and crisp. I sat to her right, my blue binder closed but ready. At 9:58 a.m., the door opened. Rachel walked in first, powder blue blazer, high ponytail, clipboard tucked under one arm. Greg followed, phone in hand, not bothering to silence it. He gave me a quick nod. Morning, Mom. Rachel smiled without warmth. We brought the originals, as requested. Her tone sang, we're in control. Greg flopped into the chair across from me like we were grabbing lunch. "Let's just make sure Mom isn't making any decisions under pressure," he said, glancing at Esther like she was the temp. I didn't respond. Esther cleared her throat and opened a file. "Today's meeting is about safeguarding Dorothy's autonomy and confirming the legal chain of authority surrounding her financial and estate matters," she said smoothly. Rachel raised an eyebrow. "That's new." Greg frowned. "I thought this was a simple review." Esther smiled, polite and firm. "It will be." She slid a set of documents across the table. Exhibit A, my authentic signature next to the one used on the forged POA. Exhibit B, property records showing my life insurance listed without consent. Exhibit C, the Google Drive spreadsheet. Greg's jaw tightened. Rachel's hand froze above her coffee. Esther turned to me. "Mrs. Parker, do you recognize these documents?" "I do. And I did not authorize any of them," Rachel cleared her throat. "This feels like a misunderstanding. You've always been generous, Dot. We thought—" I cut her off. "You knew I didn't sign that refinance form. You used my old POA signature. That's not a misunderstanding. That's fraud." Greg leaned forward. "You said you'd always help." "Not under coercion," I said, my voice steady, "and certainly not through forgery." The silence was delicious. Rachel finally spoke. "Dot, we just wanted to protect the family's future. You've been so overwhelmed lately." Esther didn't miss a beat. "If by overwhelmed you mean competent enough to hire counsel and conduct a digital audit, then yes, Mrs. Parker has been very overwhelming. For you." Greg stood up. "We're not going to sit here and be accused." "You're not being accused," Esther replied, standing to match him. "You're being documented." I opened my binder. And I turned to the final tab, the one labeled Petition for Revocation of Fiduciary Authority. Greg and Rachel came to that boardroom expecting control. What they got was documentation, lined up and color-coded. And then I spoke. I opened the final tab in my binder and slid the paperwork across the table. Petition to revoke all fiduciary authority from both Greg Parker and Rachel Parker, citing document forgery, fraudulent use of power of attorney, misuse of trust assets, financial manipulation of a vulnerable adult. The room didn't explode. That would have been too easy. No, it cracked, slowly, like ice under too much weight. Rachel reached for the documents with shaking fingers. Her eyes scanned each item, and her mouth parted like she wanted to say something, but couldn't find the right script. Greg leaned back. His face was unreadable now. Anger, confusion, fear, maybe all three. Esther spoke before they could. "These documents are being submitted to the probate court. In addition, we've filed formal complaints with the state bar and the Texas Financial Crimes Unit." She tapped the spreadsheet, the one they thought I'd never see. "This alone demonstrates premeditated financial exploitation. It names Dot's expected annual gifts as confirmed income. That's not care. That's dependency, designed and tracked." Rachel's voice cracked. "This is all being misinterpreted." "No," I said, my voice like steel. "This is being seen for the first time." Greg finally spoke. "You told me, growing up, that family helps family, that you'd always be there." I stared at him. "I was, for years, until you turned help into leverage, until you decided my death would make a better down payment than my life ever did." He flinched. Esther opened another folder. Exhibit F. Here's a notarized POA from 2018, the real one, with limited scope, signed for a temporary school trip. Not the fraudulent version submitted this year. Rachel's hand went to her necklace. Her eyes darted to Greg. "And the notary you used? Lost her license 8 years ago, meaning your submission is void. And criminal." Greg stood again, jaw clenched. "You're overreacting." Esther stood too. "And you're under arrest if this goes where we think it's going." Silence. Heavy. Full of the sound of consequences. I didn't gloat. I didn't cry. I just looked at my son. my only child. And I saw, finally, what had always been there. He didn't protect me, he enabled her. And now, they were caught. Esther handed them each a summary packet. You'll receive formal court notices within the week. We suggest you find legal counsel. Rachel opened her mouth, then closed it. I stood, collected my binder, and before I left that room, I said one last thing. I won't be part of your story anymore, but you'll always be part of mine. Documented, filed, and signed. They tried to control the narrative, forge a version of me that was frail, confused, and easy to manage. But the law had something else to say. The following week, the court clerk stamped the petition with a blue seal and 4 words that shifted everything. Fiduciary privileges formally revoked. Greg and Rachel were no longer legally allowed to act on my behalf, in any capacity. Not for banking, not for trusts, not even for medical decisions if I'd fallen ill. And they knew it. The notice was delivered by courier, signed for by Rachel's assistant at the family foundation where she worked. A second envelope went to Greg's office downtown, addressed to his supervisor at the mortgage firm, where he'd just been promoted. Inside, a copy of the complaint we filed with the Texas Financial Fraud Office. And yes, I made sure it included their spreadsheet, the one where I was listed like a recurring line item. Esther handled it all, quiet, professional, methodical. But she made one thing clear. This wasn't over. We're also notifying the state financial board, she said, her voice low but firm. If either of them has fiduciary roles for anyone else, this becomes a broader investigation. That afternoon, she forwarded me a digital alert. Rachel's donor access at her foundation had been temporarily suspended pending, quote, internal review. Greg's firm marked his employee file with pending compliance concern. I sat at my kitchen table, phone in hand, and waited for the fallout. It didn't take long. Rachel texted me at 8:12 p.m. Dot, please call. This has gone too far. No greeting, no apology, just panic. Greg followed an hour later. Mom, I need to talk to you. I didn't realize it would spiral like this. Spiral. Like this was an accident. Like I hadn't been systematically removed from my own finances, my own decisions, my own legacy. I didn't respond. Silence, I've learned, is louder than screaming, and it burns longer too, because now they had to sit with the fact that I chose to protect myself from them. I hadn't lashed out. I'd simply withdrawn the privilege of my trust, financial and otherwise. Esther called the next morning. We have what we need to move forward with the trust restructure, she said. Would you like Greg formally removed as primary beneficiary? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked at the framed photo of Lily and Eli on my mantle. Greg's kids. Innocent. Unaware. I wanted held in discretionary trust, I said. For the grandkids. With third-party oversight. Nothing goes through Rachel. Ever. Esther smiled. Consider it done. And just like that, I wasn't the one being managed anymore. I was the one managing them. Their authority was revoked. The trust restructured. But the real storm hit when their carefully curated reputations started to unravel, publicly. The first call came from a woman named Judith, who used to volunteer with me at the community library. Dot, she whispered over the line, I don't want to gossip, but is it true what they're saying about Greg? What are they saying? That he and Rachel misused some family trust. That there's been consequences. I didn't confirm or deny. I just said, some people confuse access with entitlement. And Judith, bless her, said, good. I always knew you were sharper than they gave you credit for. By the end of the week, Rachel's name was quietly removed from the upcoming donor gala at the Austin Foundation for Youth Literacy. No formal announcement, just a sudden shift in the event program. Esther had made sure they received the investigation letter from the state's financial fraud division. It's not just about the trust, she told me. Rachel's role at the foundation includes donor management. If she's shown to have forged or manipulated access to funds, even family funds, they'll take it seriously. They did. Her access was suspended. Her profile page removed from the website. Greg fared no better. His employer's legal department contacted Esther's office for clarification. We submitted the full timeline, she told me, clicking through the files. They're investigating his failure to disclose a potential conflict of interest in using your insurance policy to back a private refinance loan. That's when it happened. The golden couple image cracked. Friends who used to invite them for game night stopped calling. Mutual contacts in the neighborhood association began asking quiet questions. Not loud enough to be rude, just enough to suggest the tide had turned. One afternoon, while watering my garden, I spotted Rachel across the street in her SUV. She didn't get out, just sat there, sunglasses on, pretending to look at her phone. I didn't wave, let her feel what distance feels like when it's earned. Greg tried one more time. A letter, handwritten, full of justifications, not one real apology. Not one sentence that said, I knew what we were doing was wrong. I slid it into the back of my binder. Evidence, not reconciliation. Because this wasn't about burning bridges. It was about building boundaries so high they couldn't climb back in without integrity. They had used my name, my kindness, my legacy. Now they could live with the one they made for themselves. And everyone was finally seeing them for who they were. Their reputations crumbled under the weight of their own deceit. But the consequences weren't done falling. Some hit harder, some spread wider. Esther called with a tightness in her voice I hadn't heard before. We just got confirmation. The state opened a formal inquiry into Rachel's cousin's venture group. The one that backed their refinance? She nodded. And the one that used your life insurance policy without consent to secure private funding terms. That loan was now under audit. Every document related to it, every form, every email, every asset listed, was being examined by the Texas Office of Consumer Finance and the Department of Insurance. This could pull in federal review, Esther added, depending on whether interstate investors were involved. I wasn't surprised. People like Rachel and her cousin don't stop at one forgery. It's never just one lie. It's scaffolding built on other people's silence. But I wasn't silent anymore. Meanwhile, the trust restructure was finalized. Greg was officially removed as primary beneficiary. Instead, the funds were placed into a discretionary generation-skipping trust, meaning it bypassed him entirely and went directly to my grandchildren. And even then, I added a clause. No disbursements may be issued under parental oversight. All educational and health disbursements must be approved by a licensed third-party fiduciary. Rachel's name was flagged on file. She could never touch a cent. Greg sent one last message when the change went public. You're punishing your grandkids just to spite us. I didn't reply. Because he was wrong. I was protecting them. Protecting them from the same entitlement that had poisoned their parents. From the belief that love is transactional and that manipulation has no price. The police didn't show up at anyone's door, not yet. But they did call. An investigator reached out to Esther, then to me. Ms. Parker, would you be willing to provide a statement regarding the forged POA? Yes, I said. And I'd also like to submit a copy of an email I was never supposed to see. Rachel's email, the one that said, "Guilt works better than force." I printed it on thick cardstock and mailed it myself. Let them read their own words in ink. Because I wasn't interested in watching them suffer. I wasn't waiting for handcuffs. I just wanted truth to outlast lies. And little by little, it was. They'd built their future on borrowed ground. And I'd finally, pulled the foundation out from under it. No screaming, no threats, just paperwork. The kind that closes doors you never reopen. The audits began. The trust was restructured. The legal inquiries continued. But I had already moved on, into a life that was finally mine again.